Hey everybody, it's Kevin and Marina from the Herbalism Show. It's so good to see you. It is always good to see my friend Marina, and she just did an incredible presentation on Tuesday. I feel pretty terrible because I was working all day and I missed it. So she was kind enough to say we'll do a rapid one today for the entire audience to be able to pull in. So stay tuned with us. She did the history of now this is the very brief history of medicine in rapid format style. We'll jump into it right after this reel. Marina was complaining about the lighting, but I feel like the light always comes from Marina. She's a bright light for pharmacy, and she got to shine it on Tuesday. And so, Marina, jump right into it. Let's hear more about all the cool stuff that you did.
Thanks so much, Kevin. Yeah, it was really fun putting together the presentation actually. And I used, some bits and pieces from other presentations that I've seen over the years as inspiration for how I want to lay it out. And I always enjoy putting presentations on because I like to dig and get to the bottom of things and really understand the subject matter. So this is why I love educating others. I love coming onto this show. I love having the Herbalism channel, and I have my program where I help educate other professionals. So, all in all, I did have a confession right in the beginning, which I'll share with you all, is that I actually used to hate history and I couldn't really get into it because I couldn't really see why it mattered. So how I started the webinar and what I'd like to ask you all who are tuning in to this show, to this mini history lesson, is what do you feel like the value of history is? Why should we learn it? And for me, that answer became evident as I worked on this. And that's, learning from the past, both from the good, right, that we can have here in the present, and we continue to do those good things that got us good results, and also to learn from some mistakes that didn't turn out so well. So I do feel like it's very important. And when you start out with your mission and your purpose and your why, and you hold that strong, every goal becomes much more easier to manage and achieve, and your expectations can change. And it's so important in healing, right? Because
Amen.
We have to have that personal why of why we want to heal and what we'd like to feel like, how we'd like to heal, what healing looks like for us. Me and you are always talking about this, right? So, so it's so important for our clients, our patients, to have this why behind everything that they choose to do. And so from the history part, I also realized that it's just the history showing us something that I'm going through in my personal life and my professional life, which is really we talked about how health and healing is about homeostasis. And I feel like that's what all these events, are showing us, that there is this swing, right, that goes from one extreme to the other extreme. And we were always divisive, right, in our opinions, because we choose to go to the extreme a lot of the times, or that's how we're, pitted against each other in marketing and in politics and in so many different ways. But the truth is usually somewhere in the middle, in that balanced place. And sometimes we can only see that once we've seen what's on all the way on the other side, to the right or to the left. And that's when the wisdom comes in and says, you know what, we need to kind of bring it into a more balanced perspective. And I truly see that as a holistic view of things. And inside our individual bodies, same thing, right? We can't have one extreme, because that causes illness, and we like to be in balance. And what I also shared about how this relates to health is when we go to that homeostasis, the point is not to stay still. The point is to continue evolving and continue interacting with your environment and your internal environment. So both external and internal. And you get to continue self-regulating and responding to stimuli and to things that are happening and into your own internal worlds and your emotions. And that's the beauty of it. So it's not like homeostasis, this magic place. It really is about the journey. It's about how you journey to that place, how you continue to interact. And so it's very dynamic, and it's all about flow flowing from one state into the next. So the goal is not to be like at this perfect pinnacle of health or history, right? Be like on the cutting edge. It's about how do we get there? How do we do it with ease and flow? Um, and then the tools, medically speaking, right, they have evolved. And that's exactly what I shared in the presentation is like, what was really that foundation, that backbone that holds space for our healing? And so the really cool thing, and my point, I guess, that I wanted to bring home in the presentation was that plants, plant medicine, and the earth and nature is really this backbone that holds us and that gives us life, because we are not separate from nature. We are nature. We're not superior. We're not inferior. We just are, along with all the other living organisms and kingdoms that we share this earth with. And from our primitive forefathers and mothers, right, our ancestors, we can kind of go back centuries and millennia ago and see that evidence, according to archaeology and like looking at burials, that there were these plants that were used either medicinally, whether knowingly or unknowingly, or spiritually, or they were believed to have some sort of importance in the life of the people, right, that came way before us. And so we don't know what they were thinking or how much they knew about it or how advanced they are. But it's pretty interesting that up until now, we still don't know, right, how the pyramids exactly were built and some of this technology, and including how people actually had successful amputations without infections, right, as evidenced by the bones that were discovered like over 30,000 years ago. And we had the burials that I mentioned over 60,000 years ago. Now, there's some debate also about the validity of the remnants and what it means. But overall, we still see these in paintings, in depictions, like in Egypt and other ancient cultures, that there were flowers and there were plants painted. And then from the earliest written works, we can tell that there was materia medicas, which are what is known as plant monographs, and botanical illustrations in our earliest pharmacy texts, right? So before we had pharmaceuticals online, we were actually the herbalist. So the pharmacist, which is why I do what I do, was the herbalist in the community. So we first were herbalists and just working with the crude plants and the earth. And then also priests, right? In the early religions, and then when they started becoming monotheistic to the church, they were also essential to the healing, because we know today, we recognize it's body, mind, and spirit. So even in the early days before science, people also, they prayed, and, you know, science came along and they said, oh, well, that's superstition, right? But because they didn't have science, they had these ideas about where does illness come from. And so in the beginning, they thought it was because you were being punished by the gods. So you need to repent and you need to pray your sins away. You need to ask for forgiveness. Another theory was that there were noxious odors in the air from putrefying bodies, for example, like during times of plagues. Right. So there was some validity to the theory, and some of the things that people ended up doing because of the theories did end up helping, because sanitation improved, and you know, mental health and prayer. We now also have scientific evidence that it works. So we also had the doctors, you know, the first doctors were also the botanists, and Hippocrates, even, who's, you know, considered the father of our modern medicine. We take the Hippocratic oath. In the oath, we still swear to God also. So when he was around, it was the Greek gods, but now it's been changed to the monotheistic culture that we mostly go by. But it's interesting just to see like what they believed, and without knowing, again, or having the tools that we now have, what they were able to do with human bodies and support health, and how the theories about the organs and the blood and the circulations changed over time, and how with changing also culture and regulations around being able to quote unquote desecrate human bodies to study anatomy more diligently, and how that shaped the course of medicine. And we could kind of see where it went from like a more spiritual, like superstitious, perhaps, medicine to a more mechanical model of medicine, where when we elucidated all this inner workings of the body, now we can really apply very distinct medicines and perform surgeries as well. But still, all along, we were using plants, right, for food. Hippocrates said, let food be thy medicine. And we were using plants as food and medicine this whole time, and mushrooms too. And leeches, right? Leeches were used at one point. There were also interesting things. Yeah. So it was a wide spectrum, like, of things that we would now disqualify, maybe as being therapeutic or not. But spices were always venerated. We talked about that before. And it was obvious that they had, preservation and antioxidant activity. And then the first anesthesia had plant mixtures in there and pain relief. So it's quite fascinating. And then again, all the theories around like alchemy and transformation from one to another, biblical references to herbs as well, that do have medicinal value. And at the end, like the turn of the century, I would say about 100 years ago now, what really like introduced us to the modern era of medicine and was this industrialization and the pharmaceuticalization of medicine, right? And that happened for a few reasons. One is because there was an industrial boom in all the industries, right? So there was just a lot of innovation happening and new things were possible that weren't before. There were also some financial and political reasons too for patenting, being able to patent medicines. So we can't really do that with plants that are just growing all over the place that people have been using as medicine. There's also some control, a lot of more control over the dosage, right? And the single molecule approach and as the focal point. So as we got more scientific, it kind of made more sense to isolate the quote unquote, compounds, single molecule compounds. And around that time, like in the early 20th century, vitamins were just being discovered. So there was this opportunity to start patenting each synthetic vitamin because there was a petrochemical industry owned largely by Rockefeller, which had this ability to be transformed not only into plastics, which is another whole topic that I'm not going to get into, which has a lot of dangers now. And we're seeing the effects of that with how it messes with our endocrine system. And disrupts them. And then we are also making now these single molecule or active ingredient pharmaceuticals from plastics and from petroleum too, which I didn't even realize as, going through pharmacy school, that how are drugs even made? What's the process of this organic chemistry and other types of chemistry? So it's exciting, right? It's innovative. And I'll tell you my conclusions at the end. But
is it I mean, not to break your concentration, but you said it's exciting and it's innovative. But my question back to you is it?
Right. So I think people thought that it was, right? Chemists who were working on these projects and trying to create, like I could see how exciting it would be to have these breakthroughs and to have the tools and advancements to be able to do so. However, like there are caveats to that. So I appreciate is what I'm trying to say. And I also think that there was this political and capitalism movement also because again, the more you can do this isolationist, reductionist kind of work and create pretty much out of nothing, right? Because this is like waste that they don't need for other things. And now they're creating things that we're now ingesting into our bodies. So again, this is a giant experiment, right? History. We're like, nobody really knows what the consequences will be down the line. So I just want to say that, yeah, all the early doctors and the frontiers, they were experimenting and there were risks. There were risks for using an herb. There were risks for doing surgery. There were risks for trying to use anesthesia. There were risks in every single, time that something was going to go wrong. And yeah, people died as a result of these interventions too. And now it's no different. Every time we think, we know what we're doing, there's always a risk to benefit assessment. So we're not like, and I don't know if we're ever going to be like 100% sure that, okay, this is exactly the right way to go about this so that you can heal, right? Our medicine is so advanced, we can predict all of these and calculate all of these permutations of what's possible in the quantum and then tell you exactly what the right way to go is. So I don't know, but I can see it happening and it's not happening yet. So everything like needs to be taken with a grain of salt. Everything we need to do the same diligent risk to benefit. We can't just say, okay, this is the guideline, you fit in here, so let's go here, because we're not doing that holistic thing. Like, well, what are you doing in life? What's your mindset like? Well, what are you eating? Where are you getting the food that you're eating? You could be eating the healthiest diet. Well, what are you absorbing from that? So there's just so many factors that we're not mainstream. We're not doing it mainstream. And so what I think doesn't work about this capitalism, and let me just go back to where it comes from. So Rockefeller basically saw an opportunity to use this product that he already had, petroleum, to make it into these drugs. And him and Carnegie also funded this research by this guy who ended up writing the Flexner report, Abraham Flexner, who traveled around the country and basically said what needs to be done to advance the profession. So, and this was funded by the AMA as well. So the initiative was by the AMA, but the funding was by Rockefeller and Carnegie. But anyway, so he concluded in this very hyper-rational way of what makes a good medicine model and what doesn't. And this is what largely influenced the later scientific approach and the evidence-based medicine that we now practice with and are very, I think, supportive of, for the most part today. And again, you can see logically that it makes sense. Like he wanted more clinical work. He wanted more actual hands-on, not just asking your assistants to do something. He wanted the physicians to be hands-on. He wanted a better equipment. He wanted more oversight. And a lot of what he said makes sense, right? And it did cause great improvements. But he also said, let's close down like the rest of these like wacky, quacky, holistic and herbal and eclectic things. And half, like about 50% of the existing schools of medicine were shut down if, they weren't going to be meeting his new standards. So as a result of that, there was also sponsorships and deals for at least one member of a pharmaceutical company to be on every medical school's board. And that affected the level of education. And again, so I really see this as this big shift that again makes sense when I explain to you why, right? But at the same time, you see the drive is financial. Part of the drive is financial, and part of the reason why it's financial is because these pharmaceutical companies can afford to give grants and sponsorships to these schools, right? So it's kind of like this catch-22. But when we just focus, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just wondering right there, you just said that it is financial. How did the monetization strategy of medicine and your history review change? Because at least my like cultural understandings is oftentimes like food and or resources were shared and or bartered with the medicine man or woman of an individual group. And that is how they were sustaining their lives while they're sustaining the lives of the people around them. Like that was the transfer. And then you're seeing more and more toward kind of industrialized medicine that we have today, that it's directly you are buying or purchasing products, that are going back and forth. But just curious there, Marina, like when you're diving into this one subject on the capitalistic approach to how medicine works today, did you draw any like little conclusions or highlights?
Yeah, well, I think whenever we had barter systems in the past, it's probably exactly what you say. You know, everybody just gave what they could, and nobody really went into the profession because of the money, right? Whereas now we see, okay, there's money in this profession, so I'm going to go. There's a status, there's money, so I'm going to go into the medical field, right? And
Yep.
how different would it be if that wasn't a factor?
Yeah.
So I think it's a big consideration, and maybe some people don't realize it. But if you were really honest with yourself, it probably money and status is one of the reasons why people went into this field in the first place in the last like 100 years.
I mean, there's no question. Like, I mean, I think for anybody kind of growing up and wanting to do better for themselves, like part of it, like in our current society, is you find a good job, right? Or a good profession or vocation or whatever the case may be. And so I think that medicine, because it has a very lucrative background, became even more attractive because you could help people and take care of people and make money. But where the source of that money comes from, I think, is a really interesting like pivot or change that happened, around, what is it, 1900, somewhere around there, that we started to see that shift over toward black bag medicine, paying for the doctor kind of experience, and then paying for whatever products are coming from them. And I'm just curious from your perspective, because of that, we now see lanes like in so many directions of healthcare, that we are now put in. Are you following herbalism or naturopaths or homeopaths, or do you see an OD or a DO, excuse me, or do you see an MD? So now I was just curious, history of medicine wise, now that you're kind of getting to modern day, what do you see as those bifurcations? And do you see anything going back to how it used to be?
Yeah, so this was a little bit beyond the scope of the current presentation that I did, but I think it's a really great question, and I think the specializations is one of those things that was definitely a direct outcome of the Flexner report,
Okay.
where now it's like you can really get into the nitty gritty of exactly, each body part and each, even singular molecule, as I keep saying, that functions within a specific system. So it was a great way to really get down into the molecular, but it lost some of that generalistic and that holistic perspective, because we're not treating just one little tiny thing. Often it's not just one thing that's wrong, quote unquote, or that's causing sickness or symptoms. So we need both. So that was my conclusion too, that we can't just do very, very laser focused acute care. It's great that we have that opportunity, and sometimes it is what's necessary, right? Especially in acute care. However, like on the day to day, we can't just rely on the pharmaceutical approach, because we're missing out on all the foundational and holistic things that are supposed to contribute to the overall health and resilience and well-being. So we need both. We can't just say, oh, let's only do this, or, oh, let's only do this. And I found myself swinging from there during my life, which is why I mentioned this. Like, all right, I'm all the way allopathic. No, I'm all the way holistic. And now I'm just like, wow, well, I've had to use both. And I'm so grateful that I have the safety net of one. But if I were to just use that safety net, pretty soon I'm just gonna wear and tear, and it's not just affecting me, it's affecting everybody else who's also relying on this system. Because if you look at how much money that we spend per capita and how much medical waste there is too, it doesn't really make sense. So we need to be using both.
I mean, I don't know if I can hit a gong or like something for like a yay, or is it a golf clap on the side? But you're 100% right, Marie. And I think for this show, like that's probably for the next episode, we should talk about that both, for us to really get into. But I do think you bring up something that's perfect, is that when someone goes into a modern day medical institution or care setting, what are they expecting? Like, what are they expecting to get? And at least in my mind, Marina, like there has been a cultural shift to what you get is a silver bullet. Like you get the exact same thing that is going to take care of it. There's no holistic view, because I need it done now and I need it done perfect and targeted. But when, we really look at health and look at what's happening, there's a video that was circulating about a VA system and an individual that was a nurse taking out one pill bottle after the next, recently that circulated around about what was prescribed to her and her feeling that I wouldn't have woken up in the morning if I would have taken these things. And Donna Bartlett just shared with me the other day, she was like, it's somewhere around like 750 seniors a day are being admitted to the emergency room because of medication related issues and errors. So for us to think that we're getting silver bullets, yeah, well, maybe we are, but maybe they're hitting the wrong targets, when we're trying to do it this way all the time. And so I think when it comes to, conversations that I'm really hoping next week, Marina and I jump into on, here's the history of what plant-based medicine was, the way we viewed it, how that was starting to mature before we had this cutoff that we said, oh, nope, no more understanding of that. We're going toward, silver bullet medicine. I don't know if I'm coining any phrases there, but that was the shift I had in my mind. And so anyway, love this conversation. Super excited to be able to continue it next week and kind of talking about those elements of seeing the allopathic and the holistic split, and then how we're seeing some things come back together. So thank you, Marina. And man, I totally missed out on that conversation on Tuesday. And I'm so glad that you filled me in on some gaps today.
Yeah, well, I think if you registered, you're going to get the replay. So look out for that. And anybody who has comments or feedback about what me and Kenwin were discussing today, we'd love to hear in the comments.
Yeah, please jump in there. Thank you everybody for attending and listening to this conversation. Marina, for the folks that registered, they can get a replay of that. Is there any late registrations to be able to get the replay or any other access components? Can they get a hold of you?
I don't know. Give it a shot. Try the same link. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Test the same link out. Well, thank you everybody for coming in. We'll see you guys very soon. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.